So yeah, that's the email they sent us, so people didn't think I was pulling that out of my butt. I did not. Oh, who was talking? No? Okay. So the plan we were going to do was a mini golf event because it was outside and we could all wear masks and all that. One in the chat. Oh, okay. So, but we were just told this evening, all in-person events must be put on hold, as I said. We don't know if it'll happen. We're going to try to see what happens at the school, but we're going to gauge interest. That Mario Andretti, they have like little mini golf, 18-hole mini golf. So we were thinking of doing like a mini golf event as our one in-person event. It's outside. We require all members have to wear masks and all that. And I have not tried calling because I know FIT usually gets a discount there, but I don't know what they're doing. But usually $8 for the 18 holes. And then you can do Applebee's after and sit outside. And yeah, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to gauge interest. Where the heck? How do I do the polls? 3, launch. So do the poll, see if this is actually something I would be interested in. Once again, this might not happen. We don't know. We can hope it happens, but we don't know. Missing 5. I don't know who has not voted. I know where 3 no's are going to come from. And we have 2. Oh, no, it's another yes. All right, 4 more. This isn't binding that you have to, just something if you're interested in. It's not binding. It's not like I'm going to come after you if you don't. I just don't want to waste my time making an event if nobody wants to do it. All right, I'm going to give it another 10 seconds because we're at 14. And I know Colin can't vote, so because he's co-host, so there should be only 1 more. All right, I'm just going to end it. Okay, share. Yeah, it's a pretty big majority. I don't need to know stats. So if the school lets us do in-person events, we will attempt that. If not, we'll hold it for next semester when hopefully COVID might be better. Oops, did I stop sharing the results? I hope I did. Okay, I think I did. All right, next. So then we're trying to think of another something to do for virtual fun events. And a couple of members, Karsh, Baby, and Brian, me, Kelly sometimes. We've been playing around doing Jackbox, which is the, if you don't know what it is, like a virtual game pack. They have like Quiplash, like a trivia, murder, mystery party, stuff like that. So we're thinking of trying to organize a day not a day, a couple hours, not a whole day, to do it virtually because one of us can just share the screen and we can play virtually without having to be in person. So now go to the other poll and launch. And then if there's any interest, the other officers will try to figure out what a day and talk about the next meeting. Wow, this is going really quickly. You can end the poll too? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Okay. Okay, we're at 14 again, so I'll give it another couple seconds and I'll end it. Okay, we have enough to actually do it because the max is about 8 for most games anyways, so that would be fine. Okay, so good to know. Next. So NHC, I say in quotes, trip. I was talking with the NHC again because if you were here last year, as you know, we were supposed to go to the NHC or to one of the 2 study days we had, but we couldn't because COVID hit. So we're back in contact with NHC to try to get something organized for us with another guy that I met at AMS. He seems nice, so it works. So we're gonna do a virtual tour of some sort on Zoom or an app similar to it because he's gonna organize something for us to be able to do. And it's gonna still be one of the study days and another poll. I'm sorry, this is an inundation of polls tonight. And try to pick which one because he told me whichever one. So launch. He said either day works for them, so I want to see what works best for everybody else.
Can I just clarify something really quick?
Sure, what's up?
You don't have to be in Florida to go on the virtual tour.
No, you just need Zoom. You need access to a computer.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. I brought up to see if seniors could go, but they said obviously because the bubble. I was like, yeah, I knew that. So yeah, anybody can go as long as you have access to internet. Okay, 3 more, or 1 more technically, because we've been getting 14. All right, I'm gonna give it a couple more seconds. Okay, and okay, share results. So either works for most people. Probably gonna tell them Thursday, since Thursday 1-by-1 vote up here. So planning for Thursday, April 22nd, and once I get more information, I'll share it along to you all. Okay. This is just a general reminder for those who are in Weather Challenge. Weather Challenge starts again Monday, for those who are part of it. And the first city is the AMS Conference City, New Orleans, Louisiana. There's that. And we talked about this last time. So I'm not going to go through the whole PowerPoint again. It's just a reminder. You want to think about if you want to run for an officer position. If you want to run for an officer, you need to be at most of our meetings. And we're starting to take attendance now at the meetings to validate and make sure that you are actually showing up to the meetings. And nominations will open middle of February. Elections will be early March. And then we're going to do the fundraiser to train each new officer before most of our officers are graduating. And yeah. And this is new from Kelly from the SGA meeting she went to last night. For anyone who wants to run for treasurer, there is a organizational procedures meeting that the treasurers must attend, but SGA treasurer said that if there's any prospective treasurers that are unsure if they want to run for treasurer or not for their organization, they are welcome to come to this. It is January 25th at 5:30 p.m. and January 26th at 8 p.m. Anna, did you get all that?
Sort of. I didn't get the like dates and times at the end.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just real quick to clarify, you only have to attend one of those sessions, not both.
What she said. Yeah. Yeah, you
And
don't
then
have
that's Monday, because I did not realize that is very close. So
yeah, because our a lot of the meetings we have to do for our mandatory things starts, like president, vice president, treasurer have to do things to keep our organization actually not disabled. So that's one of the things, but this will be more specific to them. Anna, are you good?
Yeah, I guess.
Do you want? I can send you the PowerPoint after, worst case.
No, I got it now.
What? Oh, I still have it up? Oh, no. Okay. Okay, so now we're gonna do the cloud photo contest. So. 2, 3. So since we had a whole bunch of people actually that send a lot of photos in this time, how the poll is going to be paired on the people, because we have 10 different people and Zoom can only allow 10 different options. Let's see, 6. So then there'll be a vote off on whichever 2. If someone with 2 photos wins, there'll be a vote off on that. 7, 8. Okay, I think that was all of them before I do that. Oh, oops. All right, so I'm gonna open up this poll. Oh, good. We're actually way ahead of schedule. Great. If anyone wants to see any again, let me know. I can go back to them.
Yeah, You see, could you go back through them?
Which one do you want me to go back?
Just could you like go back through them? If you could do
Yeah,
that.
I'll go back through them as the polls open.
Thank you.
I had no idea to go a little fast. I wasn't trying to, so sorry in advance for going too fast. Okay. There's 5 people missing. I was looking at yours. Oh, there we go. Never mind. All right, 2 more. One more. Okay, I'm just gonna stop it. Oop, what's in the chat? Yes, that is nice. Yes, there we go. Okay, all right, I'm gonna stop it. Okay, so 6 and 7, 1. Those are both Alex's. I think she's here. Those are Alex's. Oops, I didn't share the results. Now I'm sharing the results. Hers one, so then really quick, stop sharing and run off. Okay, so the first picture is number 6, that's option 1, and number 7 is option 2. So these are the 2, 6.
I feel like I'm at the eye doctor. They're like option 1 or option 2, and I'm like, I can't see either of them.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. Okay, one more. Actually, it doesn't even matter if the last person votes anyways, because it's it worked. It was a majority. Okay, share results. Share. Okay, number 1. So this one I have on the screen one. So good job, Alex. Yay. Ooh. Okay.
Yeah.
Stop share. I think that's everything that we have for business. I got through that way quicker than I expected. So, yeah, there's the people's. So yeah. Okay. Now okay. All right. Well, wherever you went, there you are. Well, you have the floor to do whatever.
Can I share my screen on my end?
Yeah, you should be able to.
Let's see. Okay, let me know. I get a thumbs up that you can see PowerPoint.
Yep.
Sweet. Let me full screen it. All right, group. That's it for business, Cassie. Nothing else. It's mine.
Yep, it's all yours now. I finished 10 minutes early, so you have more time.
All right, sweet. Thanks, guys. I appreciate the invitation to join you all in this new year to be the first speaker. Excited to be here. I really haven't done much with Florida Tech in a while, so it's nice to be back. I've given a few talks since I left all the way back in 2011. So I've been gone for quite some time. In fact, how many years is that now? It's almost going on 10 years. I graduated with 2 degrees, both from Florida Institute of Technology. My bachelor's in environmental science back in 2008, and my master's in 2011. So I was at FIT for 7 years, had an amazing time, tried to make the best of it. I am sad to hear that Field Projects is no more, because that is one of my fondest memories in between junior and senior years. Really, a lot of the relationships that I have today were forged during that summer, because you go through hell and back when you go through Field Projects. So it's sad to hear that that's no longer there. But nonetheless, I am excited to be here and talk on behalf of the United States Space Force, because that's who I am with now. Originally, it was the United States Air Force, but a small contingent of us broke off and were effectively assigned to the Space Force, and so that's where I'm at now. So the screen that you see, hopefully you're not seeing the boxes there. Let me minimize that. The screen that you see there are just a couple examples of some recent launches that, you know, every time I see one of them take off from Cape Canaveral, now called Space Force Station instead of Air Force Station, still amazes me to this day. The top left image that you see there is from last summer during the Mars 2020 rover launch from Complex 41 aboard an Atlas V mission. For your information, that rover is expected to land on Mars here in the next few weeks. I believe it is the middle of February that it is scheduled to land and start exploring the Martian surface. So that's exciting considering it just launched here back, I believe it was August 8th. I was working that mission. I can't remember the exact date, but it was sometime, I believe, in August of just last year. Towards the middle of the screen there, everybody probably knows what that looks like simply because it is the only rocket right now at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station that can come back and land. That is a SpaceX Falcon 9 booster. Of course, it is really historic in the sense that it is the first booster that is reusable. Now, of course, a lot of other companies are starting to do it and recover it by landing it on land, including Blue Origin, but nonetheless, it's still can't get over how cool it is to see it land on the Of Course I Still Love You drone ship off of Jacksonville, or sometimes during certain launches, it comes back to land. It is pretty rare that they come back to land, but nonetheless, we have 2 landing pads at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station for them to land, simply because whenever there's a Falcon Heavy rocket, which is 3 of those boosters next to one another, 2 of them come back to land and 1 lands on the water. And then my baby there on the right-hand side, that is a Delta Heavy. We just launched NROL 44 last December, or just last month, really, just a few weeks ago. And that was a highly classified top secret mission for the National Reconnaissance Office on board a Heavy, which really still right now is the strongest and heaviest payload capable rocket that launches in the entire world. The only one that still comes close to it would be a Falcon Heavy. That's number 2, but pretty soon, hopefully this year or next, you'll see an Artemis SLS rocket start to launch soon from Cape Canaveral if things go well. So before I get really into the depth of what I do right now for the United States Space Force, I want to talk a little bit about my background. I should pause in between slides. You know, I don't want this to just be me talking the entire time. I want this to be an open conversation. I know you guys probably hear that every time a speaker comes on, but I will pause. And if you guys have any questions regarding what I just showed on the previous slide, please feel free to pipe in and ask your question. I'm definitely here to talk to you guys and communicate with you all. My background starts in southern New Jersey, right outside of Philadelphia, along the White Horse Pike, basically halfway in between Atlantic City and Philadelphia. Back in 2004, I decided to depart southern New Jersey to escape the cold winters and move down to Cape Canaveral, the Melbourne area where I attended Florida Tech. Again, 2004 to 2008, studied for what at the time was a meteorology degree. It was called a Bachelor in Science of Environmental Science. Then it got converted a few years later into a meteorology degree, but when I started, it was still environmental science. So that's what my degree says. Then I decided to stay there for a few years and got my master's degree in meteorology from the college. It was that master's degree, the second year, that I was offered an internship with the National Weather Service office in Melbourne. And that's really when things changed for me. At the same time, I volunteered for Tom Terry over in Orlando. And wasn't really a fan of the on-air meteorology, but I knew that I wanted to communicate weather to people. And I saw that I could do that at the National Weather Service. And so it's part of the reason why I joined them, in addition to the fact that I think their mission is probably one of the most important in the entire meteorological community, in the sense that they are responsible for issuing all the watches and warnings in the country, like severe thunderstorm watches, tornado watches. And I saw what those guys did in the Melbourne office, and I was pretty fascinated by it. my interest really stemmed from tropical systems and nor'easters. I've been lucky enough to love meteorology ever since I was 5 or 6 years old. My mom and dad said I was constantly looking up at the sky trying to identify clouds. At first, they thought something was wrong with me because I kept looking up, but then they realized, no, I was just interested in the sky and what was in it. Nor'easters fascinated me because they often led to a rain snow line that would establish itself somewhere over southern New Jersey to the point where the shore or Atlantic City would get rain the entire time. And then just 10, 20, 30 miles inland, they would get a full-fledged snowstorm. Unfortunately, where I lived, we were close enough to the coast where the rain snow line often set up. So there would be times when we would think it would be snowing in the morning, and then we wake up and look outside and it would be raining, which is of course very disappointing when you're hoping for a day off from school. But nonetheless, there were times when it was cold enough where we got those blockbuster storms like you see in the top picture there, my mom and dad's house, when a few times in my lifetime we've seen snowfall events over 2 feet, and it still fascinates me to this day. But there were several tropical systems that moved up the coastline, and so I joined FIT back in 2004 to kind of focus on tropical meteorology because I still to this day am fascinated by tropical cyclones, and so that's kind of where why I decided to go to Florida, because I knew tropical weather was going to be more studied better down here in the state. And boy, was I right, because 2004 was the infamous year of all the hurricanes that hit Florida. Charlie, Francis, Jean, Ivan. Of course, Melbourne was impacted by Charlie, Francis, and Jean. Lost a lot of school days that year, but also, you know, got to live through a historic year in the state, and I certainly won't forget it. Again, after I left Florida Tech, I got my degree and worked for the National Weather Service, volunteered at the Melbourne office, got an internship at the Melbourne office, then went to the Key West office to work for 2 years as what's called an intern meteorologist. However, it's kind of, I hate that they use the word intern. They don't use that word anymore, but it's effectively the first permanent position that you can get within the National Weather Service. Now they've eliminated the intern position at the National Weather Service and just made, call that position a forecaster position. So you basically start at the National Weather Service as a forecaster, of course, as a lower junior meteorologist, but nonetheless, your official title is forecaster or meteorologist. So things have changed, obviously, since I joined the National Weather Service 10 years ago. Again, I worked at the Melbourne office and the Key West office. The Key West office, I was only there for 2 years. I got island fever. I had to get the heck off that island. And luckily, Bart Hagemeyer, the meteorologist in charge at the Melbourne office, decided to hire me back. And I was with the National Weather Service in Melbourne for another 6 years before I decided to really change things up and join the Air Force at the 45th Weather Squadron. Now, obviously, I did not join in a military capacity. I did join as a civilian. There are hundreds of thousands of folks that work for the Air Force. I'd say hundreds of meteorologists that work for the Air Force, perhaps even thousands. But of course, within all of those people that study meteorology, there are plenty of civilians. So I took a civilian job with the United States Air Force. It was not active duty. I was not interested in that aspect of it, but nonetheless, they hired me to be a launch weather officer, which is where I'm at today. It has been, of course, almost 2 years now that I joined the folks with the 45th Weather Squadron. Now, when President Trump, then President Trump, created the Space Force, it was determined that any Air Force contingent that had a space-related mission would then be placed under or assigned to the United States Space Force. So that's effectively how we got assigned to the Space Force, because up until that point, the Air Force really was responsible for everything related to space. They were the ones that ensured safe access to space and tracked all space-related activities that went on outside of our atmosphere. And so with that designation of the Space Force, the 45th Weather Squadron was assigned to it, and I became a member. Even though really my paycheck still ultimately does come from the Air Force, effectively we've just been assigned to the Space Force. So that's kind of how that all works. Those are some of my colleagues there in that photo. Again, we are a contingent of both active duty enlisted members and civilians. You see the civilians like Mark Berger, Jessica Williams, Brian, Arlena, who's also a former FIT student, graduate, and Melody Lovin all the way there on the right. Those are the civilians that work with me at the 45th Weather Squadron. And then we have all the other folks that are active duty and switch out locations every several years. But nonetheless, hopefully you get to hear from Arlena and her experience. We have a very similar experience in that we graduated from FIT, got a position with the National Weather Service, decided to join the Air Force before we were assigned to the Space Force. So we both were looking for change. The National Weather Service was getting kind of stagnant, and we really thought that this was going to be a unique challenge. I had always heard of the 45th Weather Squadron working at and studying at FIT. I always had an interest in space, and in fact, when I was at FIT, I was a member of the Crimson newspaper, which I assume is still a thing. Can anyone confirm that the Crimson is still alive? Thumbs up, yeah. Maybe.
Yeah, it is.
So the Crimson newspaper is still a thing. I was the editor of that paper. And for many, many years, we hadn't gone to cover any launches from the 45th Space Wing from Cape Canaveral. But I made it a point that I wanted to go watch a few. And luckily, they gave us access, and I was able to cover a few launches from the press site at NASA's Kennedy Space Center, and that I will never forget that. So it's kind of neat to see how far I've progressed through the years, because I was there talking to the launch weather officers at the time about weather, and now I have press asking me questions as a launch weather officer at the 45th. So, you know, remember, you never know where you're going to end up in life. That's the best thing I can tell you. Keep it in mind. I love Florida. I don't envision myself going anywhere else, because this job right now poses a very unique challenge to me, and I'm enjoying it immensely. Just, you know, before I get too much into the Weather Squadron, here's the Space Force. Originally, again, the majority of any space-related mission squadrons or wings fell under the Air Force. But last year, the Air Force's Space Command effectively became the United States Space Force. So up until last year, it was Air Force's Space Command's role to ensure safe access to space. That's where we come in by providing launch coverage in the Eastern Range, which is what you see in that picture there, basically Cape Canaveral and NASA's Kennedy Space Center, or the Western Range, where the 30th operations groups run out of, that is Vandenberg. It is our job to ensure missions successfully launch from either the Western or the Eastern Range. But there's also plenty of other contingents within the Air Force Space Command that tracked satellites, that track satellite debris. Our adversaries do not come after our satellites, because of course they are worth multi-billion dollar satellites. So it was originally the Air Force's position to make sure that all of our astronauts at the International Space Station, as well as our satellites, remain safe from any potential threats. Now that role has fallen under the Space Force, which is on the right-hand side. The 45th Space Wing, which is basically the wing that covers both Patrick Space Force Base and Cape Canaveral Space Force Base, fall underneath of the Space Force. We fall under the 45th Operations Group at the 45th Weather Squadron. So that's kind of how it all falls into place nowadays. So when you hear Space Force, it is the newest branch of the military, but it effectively was born out of what the Air Force was already doing. And to some extent, the Air Force also has a similar story, in that the Air Force was generated underneath of the United States Army, and then it eventually became its own branch of the military. So that's kind of how things are progressing through the years. I know Space Force can be joked about a lot, but I just wanted to give a little background as to why we are here where we are today. So you guys have any questions about that, about my background or the Space Force, before I get into weather?
I have a quick question, like more personally. I could always maybe contact you after, but I spent like about a year trying to get into active duty Air Force as a weather officer. And it's just like a mess to deal with the recruiters and stuff, because there's a lot of dead ends, and it's just like, it's just rough. So I would be interested in getting more information on joining the civilian side.
So you said officer, so you already had a 4-year degree that would have made you eligible to become an officer, or no?
I'm graduating in May, so I was
I
attempting
gotcha.
to get into OTS over the summer.
Interesting. Okay. Well, yeah, and I know people that are involved with that, so of course we can definitely communicate after this. And I'm not sure I put my email at the end, but I'll provide everyone the email, or maybe Cassie can send it out to the group. So absolutely. Any other questions? Okay. So not hearing any. I am fascinated with the history of Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. So I kind of want to talk about this because it boggles my mind, the history that has taken place on the base, which is Cape Canaveral Space Force Base now, but it wasn't always known as that. It was known as Cape Kennedy for the longest time. Keep in mind that when you hear Cape Canaveral really means the area of land that covers both Kennedy Space Center as well as Cape Canaveral Space Force Base. It kind of covers that land that juts out east of Florida. Of course, NASA's Kennedy Space Center is on Merritt Island, and then there's Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, which at some point was called Cape Kennedy in honor of, of course, John F. Kennedy, whose desire was to go to the moon. But the military, in some form or another, has had a presence out here since the late 1800s. Initially, it was the United States Coast Guard that built the Cape Canaveral Lighthouse that was constructed all the way through the mid-1800s and was finally completed in 1847. Now, eventually, due to erosion activities, coastal erosion, that lighthouse has actually been moved, but part of the original structure is still there. So we're talking about a structure that's been over 160, 170 years old. So at some point, we hope to bring you all out. I know you guys have been to the 45th Weather Squadron before, but perhaps once things calm down with COVID, we can get a tour of the facilities, because it's pretty fascinating that a lot of the launch pads where many of these historic launches have occurred are still left there. A lot of them are rotting away because no other launch provider has decided to come in and take over that launch pad. Some launch pads have indeed been taken over by other launch providers. Take, for instance, SpaceX and Blue Origin. I'll show you where they're at now. But nonetheless, several of the launch pads, including the ones that you see here today, like 1950, originally Cape Canaveral, of course, was run by the Coast Guard and the Navy just because of its unique position, how it jutted out into the Atlantic Ocean. It was a unique position that the United States military wanted to be somewhat in control of. In the 1940s, the Army decided to designate it as a missile testing center. And so that's really, after World War II, kind of how Cape Canaveral got its start. At the time, we really, rocketry was very new. And so we decided to basically steal some technology from the Germans, who at the time were very much involved in missile defense. And with their B-2 bombers and B-2 rockets, we effectively, after World War II, decided to steal some of their smartest people, including Wernher von Braun, who basically gave birth to the first missiles ever recorded in the world back in during World War II. And it wasn't until 1950 that we finally launched our first rocket from Cape Canaveral with the help of Wernher von Braun. If you look up von Braun, there's an incredible amount of history behind it, but all of the rockets that you see here on the screen are effectively a result of his expertise. We effectively stole him from Germany. He was a pretty bad guy. You will learn that as well. But nonetheless, he is the brainchild behind a lot of history at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. And these launch pads that you see here from left to right are still there. The original concrete, some of the original structures are still at Cape Canaveral. So when I tell you that hopefully you guys can come out at some point in the next few years when things calm down, we'll hopefully be able to provide you a tour with not only the Weather Squadron facilities, but some of these pads, because I gotta say, it still boggles my mind that I can walk on the same pad that Alan Shepard launched from back in 1961. And in fact, we're coming up on what would that be, the 60th anniversary of when he launched from Complex 5. This is an actual image that was taken back from May 5th, 1961. You see the image of Alan Shepard launching aboard Mercury Freedom 7. This was the first suborbital human flight from Cape Canaveral. On top of it all, of course, we weren't the first to go to space. Unfortunately, Russia was, but nonetheless, the space race was on back in the 1960s. And so this image still, I can't get over things look at the Cape, but nonetheless, how some of these things are still the same, including the train tracks that you see, these rocket pads that moved back and forth away from the rocket. They're still out there. And so hopefully you guys get to see them one day. But the history that's taken place is really good. We, of course, started with suborbital flights back in 1961. Then we did orbital flights from Complex 14. This was on board the Mercury Atlas rocket. This was Friendship 7. John Glenn launched February 20th, 1962, for the first orbital flight that went around Earth multiple times. Alan Shepard just went up into suborbit, not quite space, and then came back down. Still, it was a big deal what happened 60 years ago now. I realize now that Gemini 3 there on the left-hand side, 1950, that should actually say 1965. I just put this together yesterday because I thought you guys might be interested in some of the manned space flight that we've had here at Cape Canaveral. 1965 is when the first Gemini rocket launched with 2 astronauts. Now, the images that you see here, Alan Shepard and John Glenn, they were aboard a Mercury Redstone rocket and Atlas Mercury rocket. They could only hold 1 astronaut. The Gemini program allowed 2 astronauts on board. Gemini program was to effectively get ready to go to the moon. And so they did lots of orbital flights, and then eventually they did some tests where they went around the moon and then came back to Earth. They never landed on the moon with the Gemini program. But then there was Apollo, which of course everybody remembers from the Saturn V era. If anybody's been out to KSC to see the Atlas rockets, the first Apollo launch with humans on board was the Apollo 7 mission from Complex 34. That occurred back in 1968. And they did about, I think, I'm trying to remember the exact number, 7 or 8 Apollo missions with astronauts that some of them went to the moon, not all of them, only the last couple ended up really going to the moon. And of course, everyone knows from Apollo 11 through Apollo 13 and 14. I have some cool video from Apollo 12 here that's weather related. So I wanted to talk about that with you guys too. Space Shuttle era started in 1981. Now, what was unique about the Space Shuttle era is that the Space Shuttle was effectively a plane that was attached to the main core booster, the large orange tank. The image that you see there is from STS-1, Space Shuttle Columbia, but in this instance, it was the only time that the main core booster was painted white. It wasn't, it was only done one time, and then from STS-2 onward, the tank was painted and rusted orange more so than anything else. 2 very large solid rocket motors were attached to the side of it, and then the Space Shuttle was actually the one with the RS-25 engines that fired and sucked all of the fuel out of the main booster. And so every time that the Space Shuttle came back, they were able to reuse those engines on the back of the individual space shuttles. So still, again, fascinating stuff to me. The history behind what's happened at Cape Canaveral. Space Shuttle ran from 1981 through 2010. So it was about 10 years now that we haven't launched astronauts from Cape Canaveral until last year when SpaceX launched the Falcon 9 Crew Demo 2, I believe it was called, or Demo 2, when astronauts Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken launched from Launch Complex 39. Launch Complex 39 happens to be the same launch complex that Space Shuttle, that the various space shuttles launched out off of, as well as the Saturn V Apollo missions, the Saturn V, I should say. The Saturn 1 and 1B launched from Complex 34. It wasn't until the Saturn V that came along that they launched from Complex 39. I know I'm throwing a lot of history out at you guys, but nonetheless, just wanted to show you the history of what's happened. So it had been 10 years since we launched astronauts from Brevard County. So I hope you guys get to see it, and you got to see it last year. And if not, we have 2 or 3 manned missions, crewed missions, that are launching from Brevard County here this year. The next opportunity, as I understand it, is not until May or June. So it will be a while. We have several astronauts up there right now. They're going to have to make some room anymore from Brevard County. I'll stop talking here for a second unless there's a question before I move on. So here is a layout of Cape Canaveral Space Force Station and Kennedy Space Center. These are the active launch pads. Anything that you see with the little triangle symbol there shows Complex 39A and 39B. This is NASA property up here. This is where the Saturn V launched any Apollo mission from, both from Launch Complex 39A and 39B. The space shuttle also launched from both of those pads. However, most of the launches did take place from Launch Complex 39. And it is important to note that Falcon missions, including Starlink and other commercial launches, take place from Launch Complex 39A. Elon Musk got an incredible deal to convert LC-39A to a SpaceX pad. I hope he realizes how lucky he is. I'm not sure NASA was particularly, they may be regretting their decision to give it to him, but nonetheless, 10 years ago, they allowed SpaceX to come in and do their thing from LC-39A. What is kind of cool is this year, later this year, we are going to have the SL rocket or Artemis that is going to launch from LC-39B. Some of you guys may have seen they did a green run with their engines on board the Common Booster Core. I think that was up at Stennis, somewhere up in, yeah, I think it was Stennis. Unfortunately, that didn't go exactly as planned, but it seems like they are going to be able to continue progressing towards a launch sometime later this year. The SLS is going to be the biggest rocket ever launched from Brevard County since the Saturn V. So certainly before any of us have been able to see a rocket that big. It's even larger than it has more power, I should say, maybe not larger, more power than the space shuttle did. So that is going to rock Brevard County when it launches, hopefully sometime later this year. Everywhere else, these are labeled as complex, CX instead of LC. NASA refers to their pads as launch complexes. Cape Canaveral Space Force Station refers to their launch pads as complexes, so that's why it's labeled CX. You see them from top to bottom, including some historic launch pads. You see every launch provider that has ever gone from the individual pads that you see here. There are plenty more where this came from, so I'm not going to go through them all, but the active pads include Complex 41, where ULA launches Atlas rockets, and Vulcan, eventually Vulcan, which is basically a combination of the best parts of an Atlas V rocket and a Delta IV rocket. They are going to be launching from Complex 41. United Launch Alliance also launches Delta IV rockets from Complex 37. These Delta IV Heavy, like the one that just launched in December, there's only 3 left to launch from the Eastern Range. I believe there's 2 more to go from the Western Range out at Vandenberg. So we don't have many more Delta Heavies to go. They'll probably be retired in 2023 or 2024. But you'll notice that the same pad that we're launching Delta IV Heavy rockets from now, we used to launch Saturn I and Saturn 1B rockets from during the Apollo era. Complex 40 currently launches Falcon 9 rockets. So both LC-39A and Complex 40 are owned by SpaceX. Some other active pads include Complex 13. That's where Atlas Agena rockets, some of the first rockets ever launched from Cape Canaveral, were initially sent from. But now SpaceX uses them as landing zones, both landing zone LZ1 and LZ2, for when they want to reuse their boosters, and instead of landing it out in the Atlantic, they land them on land. We've also got Blue Origin joining on board. That is going to be launching from Complex 36. That is the New Glenn rocket. It is a massive rocket. I think on par with what the SLS is going to be. So look for that sometime, I think next year, 2022, not 2021. I think they originally tried for 2021, but it is the biggest pad I have ever seen in my life. It is even bigger than LC-39A and LC-39B. What they are doing to Complex 36 is amazing. Is amazing. And then all the way down here by the Morrell Operations Center are complexes 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Why do I like to point them out? That's where the original Redstone Mercury rockets, this is where Alan Shepard and John Glenn, Gus Grissom launched the initial orbital and suborbital flights from Cape Canaveral. So pretty close to where I work out of. Those pads are indeed still there. So pretty cool, lots of history. I see I'm talking already for 20 to 30 minutes. Sorry, guys, but you can see I'm excited about space and weather, so bear with me. The 45th Weather Squadron's primary mission is to exploit the weather to assure safe access to air and space. Really, the only reason why the 45th Weather Squadron exists is because of the importance of ensuring that rockets get safely up into space. But there are lots of other Air Force and Space Force activities that take place on base that we have active duty airmen constantly forecasting the weather for. So it is a 24/7 operation that takes place at both Patrick and Cape Canaveral. So we have three parts of the 45th Weather Squadron. The first we call WXR, and that's primarily enlisted members that provide 24/7, 365-day resource protection. So you can imagine that the value of Cape Canaveral and Patrick Air Force Base, a Space Force base, probably runs in the billions of dollars simply because of all the activities that take place on day to day. That's where WXR forecasting comes into play. They are the ones that issue forecasts for any aircraft that are taking off from Patrick, or for any day-to-day activities that are taking place at SpaceX, Blue Origin, NASA, and United Launch Alliance facilities. They issue 24-hour-a-day, 7-day forecasts, and also are responsible for all weather-related watches, warnings, advisories. So the folks at the WXR are the ones that issue phase 1s and phase 2 lightning advisories for specific areas on both Cape Canaveral and Patrick Air Force Base, Space Force Base areas. They monitor rings around certain pads, including complexes 41 and 39, and issue phase 1s and phase 2 lightning advisories as appropriate. But of course, they also issue tornado watches, severe thunderstorm watches in unison with the National Weather Service to ensure that folks at both bases are indeed prepared for any inclement weather. WXS, which is what I am part of, provide launch weather support for the generation, execution, and recovery of any launch mission. So obviously it takes a lot for a rocket to get from its multitude of pieces where it is built all around the country to launch day, to T0. We are there to provide forecasting and meteorological watch, if you will, or Met Watch, when those components get to Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, Patrick Space Force Base. Anytime any piece of the rocket or anytime the rocket is put together on base, which we would consider the generation phase, we provide forecasting services. Obviously, the biggest component is during launch day. That is when we provide the most tailored launch support. Eventually, that is the execution phase. Some rockets are starting to be reused or recovered. The Space Shuttle booster core, that was actually recovered. That was one of the first things that were recovered in history. They tried to reuse the engines when the shuttle landed at the shuttle landing facility, but the orange booster that you saw attached to the space shuttle did land in the water, and a boat went and recovered it. Anytime any of these pieces of the rocket fall back and are expected to be reused, we provide recovery forecasts for that. And then there is WXT, which in order to do all this and to forecast for these multi-billion-dollar assets, we have to have those folks in tactics, training, and technology integration, or WXT, that maintain what we consider the most dense and most diverse weather sensor network on the planet. I can't tell you how important it is to realize that you are, as students at FIT, closer to two of the biggest weather-related branches of the government or federal facilities compared to, I think, any other college on the planet. You have direct access to the National Weather Service, but you also have direct access to the 45th Weather Squadron and Kennedy Space Center. So maybe three, if you think of it. You have access to their knowledge and to their weather sensor network. All of the weather sensors that we have on Cape Canaveral, the information is published every single day onto the internet, and you can get that information. It is a fascinating area. Brevard County is a fascinating area to study And so I hope at some point you guys take advantage of the fact that you are so close to so many different potential, areas of research and the knowledge base in Brevard County. I really think in terms of the meteorological community, maybe outside of Norman, Oklahoma, I don't think there's any other place quite like it in the country. And I'd say our sensor network, weather sensor network, is probably even better than Oklahoma. They've got a lot of agencies based out in Oklahoma for severe weather research, but what we have access to here is incredibly unique, and I hope you guys take advantage of that before you depart the Melbourne area. So what I do at WXS is to ensure that all the rocket pieces are put together safely from a weather perspective, and that eventually they launch safely from their respective pad. I am a United Launch Alliance assigned launch weather officer. So I work with the folks at United Launch Alliance. I mentioned earlier that Arlena Moses, actually you see her here. This was the first female launch weather team ever launched that ever took place at the 45th Weather Squadron just a few months ago. So that was awesome to see. But Arlena, she has been assigned to SpaceX. It doesn't mean we work for SpaceX. It doesn't mean we work for United Launch Alliance, but we work with them. We are still Air Force, Space Force employees, but it is nice to have direct lines of contact with specific individuals so that they can constantly come to us and direct their questions to us instead of talking to someone new every single day. And so that's where I come in. I am assigned to United Launch Alliance. So if any booster, like you see here, comes on the back of an Antonov, or whether it comes from their rocket ship, they actually have a ship that transports their boosters from Decatur, Alabama to the Cape, or if it flies on the back of an Antonov like the Mars 2020 rover booster did, any major operation that takes place on the Cape, I am responsible for issuing those forecasts. Of course, there are a lot of things that have to take place before you get to T0, so we're called upon a lot to provide those forecasts. But at T0, that's when the launch weather team gets together in the Morel Operations Center to evaluate the weather conditions before and up to T0. We can call a hold during a launch up until about T-3 to T-5 seconds. So we have to evaluate the weather all the way up practically until T0, just a couple seconds beforehand. But in order to do that, in order to evaluate the weather, we have many team members that include the launch weather officer. So if it's a United Launch Alliance mission, I would be the primary launch weather officer, but then I have support staff, including a radar launch weather officer, whose primary mission is to interrogate radar to ensure that we are not going to see any lightning or triggered lightning as a result of the rocket launch. And I'll get into triggered lightning here in just a second. We also, from a military side, have folks who work with the operations group and the space wing to ensure that they know where we are in the count and whether we are go or no go. So we have active duty members that are considered the launch weather director and commander that work with the space wing brigadier general or the colonel. And it's their primary goal to stay in contact with the military side of things. And then there's also a recce LWO, reconnaissance LWO, where a launch weather officer actually maintains communication with an aircraft to investigate any clouds that we want to corroborate with radar to ensure that we may not be seeing something that the radar is not seeing, or the vice versa. So we actually do hire a plane out of Sanford to go interrogate cover in the area. If there are no clouds, the recce LWO position is not used, but nonetheless, it can help corroborate what we see on radar. And sometimes that aircraft can get us out of a go or no go situation. So it is important because the radar beam, as you get further and further away from the radar, the wider it gets. So the information that it's telling us is not as high resolution. And so even though our radar is centered off of 520, it was put there for a reason, it is still pretty far away from the Cape, such that by the time it's interrogating cloud cover over Cape Canaveral, the individual pixels can be rather large. And so it's not telling us the whole story. So that's why we hire an aircraft and use a recce LWO to interrogate the cloud cover that you see. It's critically important that weather forecasters or the launch weather team ensure the weather is safe. we've had from 1988 to 2019, a total of 626 countdowns where we've eventually had to start interrogating the weather. Typically, we start interrogating lightning launch commit criteria approximately 3 hours before T0. But back in the 80s and 90s, even the early 2000s, we were interrogating the weather as far back as L-6 hours, 6 hours beforehand. Anytime we start to pick up the count and start to evaluate the weather, we consider that a countdown. Of those 626 launches that you see from 1988 through 2019, nearly 60%, in excess of 60% of them were able to launch during that particular countdown. However, 231, or about a third of those launches, scrubbed. Either they scrubbed for a technical reason or they scrubbed because of weather. So if a launch scrubbed, look at what the percentages of missions that scrubbed were due to weather. In fact, it says here 50% of scrubs were a result of weather, or 48 if you want to be exact. For those countdowns that eventually launched, or about 63% of them, 70% launched on time, but 30% were delayed. Now keep in mind, just because you have T0 doesn't mean you don't have a window to launch that mission. Sometimes certain missions, depending on orbital mechanics, a mission might have an hour-long window or a 2-hour-long window. A lot of missions have an instantaneous window where it can either launch at T0 or it doesn't launch at all. So some launches have opportunities or windows. So if you can't launch at T0, we may push it back an hour and attempt to launch. Well, 31% of launches that actually occurred were delayed at some point, with 30% of those delaying due to weather. So you can see that weather has a significant impact on launch operations at Cape Canaveral and the Kennedy Space Center. In totality, 30% of launch days are due to weather, launch delays, sorry. Nearly 50% of launch scrubs are due to weather, and 24% of all countdowns. Now, again, this is only through May 2019. I know it's a little old. Of the 626 countdowns, 24%, or 1 in 4 launches, are impacted by weather in some form or another. So weather does have a huge impact on operations, and that's why it's our goal to ensure that they are launching safely, but also efficiently. If we can get them to move that T0 so that it doesn't impact their launch operations or potentially even move their launch, we try and do that. If the weather looks like it's going to be nice on another day, there are some launch providers that will actually take that into account now and move their launch on account of what we tell them. Because each time you scrub a mission, there is a lot that goes into play in order to recycle the count 24 or 48 hours from your original T0. In fact, I'd argue sometimes it costs launch providers, particularly the older ones like NASA and United Launch Alliance, it costs them millions of dollars to have to reset the clock every time. So if we can prevent that from happening, you can imagine that our launch providers would be very happy. Lightning launch commit criteria, which is really what our main responsibilities are the rules that identify conditions that must be met to assure safe space launch. Now, the current Lightning launch commitment criteria that we have today aren't like what they were during the Apollo missions. They aren't like even really what they were during the space shuttle era. They have evolved through the years, but in some form or another, the current LLCCs were greatly influenced by 2 historical events. The first, we have to go back all the way to 1969 during the Apollo 12 mission. I will send you guys, I realize now that it's already past 8 o'clock. There are a couple cool videos that I think would be neat for you guys to watch after the fact. But the Apollo 12 mission launched when there was a cold front directly over the area. At the time, President Nixon was there, and if you watch any of the videos from Apollo 12, it's pretty fascinating to see all of his aides holding umbrellas on top of him during the launch. The Apollo 12 mission was struck by lightning twice, 36 seconds into launch and 57 seconds, approximately 57. I don't remember the exact number, but it was struck by lightning twice. They lost a lot of their onboard navigation displays. At the time, they were mainly buttons, but they lost a lot of their onboard guidance displays for about 10 to 20 seconds on board the Apollo 12 as it was leaving Earth. And in fact, as it was approaching max Q, because of those lightning strikes. Up to that point, they knew that thunderstorms were hazardous to rockets, but they didn't know a lot about triggered lightning. And what the Apollo 12 mission taught them was that when you send a rocket rapidly through an electrified cloud, it can potentially trigger lightning. And so a whole new set of lightning launch commit criteria were born as a result of the Apollo 12 mission. Up to that point, the only rule that had been in place was don't send it near or through a cumulonimbus, which is effectively a thunderstorm, right? So that was a very rudimentary rule back in the 1960s. It wasn't until 1969 when they had a thick stratocumulus deck and altocumulus deck from that moderate rain associated with that cold front that they knew a lot about triggered lightning. Unfortunately, there was still a lot to be left to be desired through the 70s and 80s, and there were a couple close calls with the space shuttle era, none that led to lightning striking the space shuttle, but there was another mission failure in 1987 when an Atlas Centaur launched from Cape Canaveral, and 37 seconds into launch, lightning struck the rocket. Now, lightning by itself does not cause the rocket to explode. It is a metal cage, right? Just like an airplane is meant to withstand lightning strikes. They're struck by lightning quite often. Rockets can be struck by lightning. They certainly are struck by lightning when they're out at the pads, but they also do have million-dollar catenary systems or lightning protection systems that surround the rocket. Well, sometimes, unfortunately, there have been certain instances where lightnings do indeed strike a rocket. And in 1987, the lightning led to an onboard computer system switching ones to zeros and zeros to ones. So instead of the rocket continuing its upward trajectory, it started to basically turn upside down and had to be destroyed. Again, lightning by itself is not going to destroy the rocket because the metal exterior of the rocket should be able to absorb that energy. But a lot of the electronics that control where a rocket goes are on the exterior of the rocket. And so that sudden injection of electricity can cause those electronics to potentially be fried or to potentially be affected and cause the rocket to go off course. In this case, 1987, members at the United States Air Force determined that the Centaur Atlas was not going in the right direction, so they had to blow it up. There are buttons at the Morrell Operations Center that what our Air Force members called a MIFCO, a Mission Flight Control Officer, have access to. It is their responsibility to ensure that the rocket is maintaining the course that it is supposed to. If it does not, they have a big red button that they can push to cause the rocket to explode. That has nothing to do with the 45th Weather Squadron, but nonetheless still think it is very cool. What lightning launch commit criteria are really designed to protect is not necessarily natural lightning, because it's very easy for a meteorologist to determine whether there's lightning in the area. What is more difficult is to determine whether the atmosphere is in a disturbed state and to determine whether if you send a rocket through them, you might trigger lightning strikes. On a traditional day when there's not a lot of cloud cover and not a lot of activity going on, you might have an undisturbed electrical field that can potentially be disturbed when you send a rocket through them and basically affect those individual lines, which are equipotential lines or lines of equal electrical fields. That rocket, as it launches through space and develops a plume on its bottom side, can disturb the electrical fields and effectively provide a connection between either positive and negative or negative and positive charges. And so the rules that were born out of the Apollo 12 and the Atlas 67 launches were for these rocket-triggered lightnings, which they really didn't know a lot about until those two instances. So it is triggered lightning that we are most scared about, because we have plenty of sensors at the Cape to tell us whether there is natural lightning or clouds that are producing lightning automatic or by themselves. But what it is more difficult to determine is whether those clouds are capable of triggering lightning if you send a rocket or something fast moving through them. plenty of instances of airplanes triggering lightning as you fly through an electrified field. And unfortunately, there are instances where a rocket provides that necessary connection to lead to a triggered lightning strike. So that's where the 10 lightning rules that you see here were kind of born from. There are a total of 10 as it stands now. You see the 10 listed here. The tribal electrification rule, which is number 10, does not apply to a lot of the rockets because some of the rockets can be treated to prevent static electricity from building up on the exterior. And that's kind of what tribal electrification is. When a rocket is reaching a certain altitude and a certain speed, it is developing a static field around its exterior. But the majority of rockets that are built today are designed to avoid that static electricity from building on the outside. So most launch providers don't have to follow the tribal electrification rule. But you can imagine how that could potentially be a problem if you're sending a rocket that's building up static electricity on its exterior. The rules that are designed to prevent interaction with natural lightning are basically rule number 2. There's only one rule out of the 10 that apply to natural lightning. And that basically says that a launch operator must wait 30 minutes to fly if there is any lightning within 10 nautical miles of a thunderstorm. That's the only rule. And really, that was the only rule in place before Apollo 12. But then there were a whole new set of rules that were designed for triggered lightning. Surface field mill rule, the cumulus cloud rule, the attached anvil cloud, detached anvil cloud, disturbed weather rule, debris cloud, thick cloud, smoke plume rule. I'm not going to go into all of them, but just know, and I know you guys, I'm talking to meteorologists today, know that as you enter the freezing level, and particularly the plus 10 Celsius to the minus 20 Celsius level, so from about, I'd say, 10,000 to about 25,000 feet above Cape Canaveral, where those temperatures fall in that critical layer, you can get clouds that develop a mixture of ice droplets, of ice particles, and water droplets. Those particles, when they kind of rub against one another, or when gravity causes the lighter particles to go to the top and the heavier particles to go to the bottom, create an electrical field inside of the clouds that when you send a rocket near or through them, it can provide that connection between those two fields and trigger a lightning strike. Now, certain rules have bigger standoff distances like 10 miles and 5 miles. Other rules for certain rules that you see here have lower standoff distances like 0 or flight through or up to 3 nautical miles. It really depends what rule you're talking about, but obviously you can see the importance of trying to avoid an anvil cloud or a detached anvil cloud, because those clouds that are able to get high enough to the anvil level, 30, 40,000 feet, are going to be able to carry that charge with them from the original cumulonimbus cloud. And if you send a rocket anywhere near them,
It will.
Well, three things. We're trying not to interrupt. We were going for like 10 minutes trying to figure out when to get a good spot. 1, Split apparently is raising his hand, which just happened. 2,
Okay.
we wanted to do the group picture before anybody else has to leave. And 3, Split asked a question in the chat, but we just couldn't find a way to get it in.
You can keep going after this. That's fine.
Yeah, you can keep going. We just need to do a group picture because one person has to leave. We
Okay,
already had 3
I know,
people.
guys. I'm sorry I'm talking so long today.
No, you're good. I'm about to do a group picture real quick. Okay.
You want to do the question first?
Yeah, I'll do it. Split, what's your question first?
Or we can read it if you're unable to.
Okay, no, just skip that. Was so long ago.
Oh God, sorry guys.
No. So, what's your sense of the equipment on the newer rockets? Are they more, getting better in terms of their sensitivity to electrical surges and so forth, or are they becoming more sensitive?
Becoming less sensitive. There is a push in the private community in particular to retrofit any of the rockets that they've already launched, or to come up with new rockets entirely that will be able to withstand triggered and natural lightning. Obviously, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos don't even rely on the 45th Weather Squadron for a launch. If they would prefer to push their button and completely get rid of the Eastern Range altogether, I would argue that a big reason why the Eastern Range is as big as it is today is because of the weather contingent. We really play the biggest role out of all of the individual squadrons that find themselves at Cape Canaveral. We are probably the most recognized and the well-known, but we're also the most hated, because sometimes we cancel a launch because of a silly anvil cloud that doesn't look like much to you or I, even though as meteorologists, we know those clouds may be holding a charge. That ultimately we play the biggest role in why rockets missions are scrubbed or canceled. So ultimately, SpaceX and Blue Origin both want to launch rockets that are completely insensitive to weather from a lightning perspective. I still think they're going to need a weather contingent because of surface winds, wind shear. It's very hard for rockets to battle wind shear, and other things, other things outside of the lightning launch commit criteria. So anyway, I know that was a long-winded answer, but yes, it is the goal of launch providers to not even worry about lightning anymore. I think, Cassie, you wanted to do a picture?
Okay,
or no?
there we go. Yeah, if anyone wants to turn their camera on real quick before I do it, if there's anybody else, you don't have to. It's not required. Okay, I'm gonna do it. Okay, everyone smile awkwardly. So you ready? 1, 2. And let me get that. Got it. Okay, cool. Thank you. Now you can continue on.
Okay, so yeah, are you guys cool with me talking until 8:30? I mean, I know it doesn't look like I put you guys to sleep, at least. So
that's fine. I just wanted to get it just in case. We already had a couple drop, even though I said wait or let me know. One person asked me no, so I mean,
well, okay,
I just wanted to do that. You can keep going.
Hopefully they didn't drop because I'm boring.
No, they probably. Well, one of them has to wake up at 2 a.m. So.
Oh, yeah.
So that makes sense why she didn't drop. I kind of understand that.
So I'm near the end. I'm near the end anyway, guys. So I promise. Nonetheless, these are the 10 rules that you see here. You and I know, and if you don't know already, know the importance of those cloud layers where electrification occurs. That again, +5 to -20 degrees Celsius level is where all the happenings of generating those strong enough electric fields to get lightning to occur. That is the area that we use radar and the recce or reconnaissance aircraft to investigate, because if the clouds are too thick or they're too detectable by radar in the sense that their decibel values are too high, we have certain radar values that we need to avoid. Those are all things that could put us into a no-go situation. And so we are evaluating typically these 9 rules. The last 2 are pretty easy, right? If there's no smoke plume, we don't have to worry about it. If there is a smoke plume that's attached to a cumulus cloud that reaches a certain depth, then we have to be a little bit worried about potentially flying a rocket through it. But that almost never happens. In fact, I don't think we've ever seen a mission impacted by the smoke plume rule. But nonetheless, the plume from a fire with its ashes and stuff takes on a uniquely electrified characteristic that if it does get attached to a cumulus cloud, you don't want to fly anywhere near through it. So that's why the smoke plume rule is there. And then there's the tribal electrification rule that I already mentioned earlier. These rules are constantly being evaluated by a lightning advisory panel, which is made up of 10 scientists from all across the country, universities, academia, and different organizations. In fact, I don't know if you guys know Dr. Dwyer. I believe he is still at FIT. He just recently joined as a lightning advisory panel member, which I think is really cool. I think he's still at FIT, but anyway, he joined, and it is their role to ensure that these rules make the most sense, and if they can be modified in any ways based off of new technology or new known information, that we might be able to make these rules a little less stringent and allow for more launch availability. Because of course we don't want to impact a mission, but at the end of the day, we would much rather see a mission success be delayed than a mission fail as a result of a triggered lightning strike. So how do we do it? and I've already mentioned this before, we use one of the most powerful set of sensors that anywhere in the world has, really the most dense and diverse operational weather networks that provides the support that we need to the Eastern Range. There are 10 unique systems that have over 400 individual weather sensors. And again, this information is published online every single day. I don't think its entirety is published every single day, simply because, as it says here, we're talking about gigabytes worth of weather data daily, but nonetheless, the access is there. And of course, we can get that information to you if you don't see it on KSC's website. Some of the weather sensors include your standard weather balloons. One of the reasons why National Weather Service Melbourne doesn't launch weather balloons is because the 45th Weather Squadron has an agreement with a contractor at Cape Canaveral that launches weather balloons from XMR or the skid strip every single day. They launch theirs a little differently. They launch theirs at 10Z during the summer, I think. And also at sometimes 15Z during the summer, because we want that difference between early morning and late morning when the sea breeze starts to develop, as well as the 0Z sounding. So they don't launch it at 12Z or an hour before that, 11Z, like most National Weather Service offices. But these balloons are launched every single day from the Cape by the contractor out there. But during missions, they can be launched as many 9, 10, 11 balloons can be launched during the countdown, because that information is critical to determine the direction in which the rocket is going to be pushed by the atmospheric winds. And so that is something that the rocket engines can take into account. There is a very critical weather balloon at about an hour beforehand that takes into account atmospheric wind data to ensure that the rocket is prepared to go certain speeds, or the engines can be pointed in a specific direction to compensate for the strong jet stream that might be overhead. Those files get loaded into the trajectory of the rocket and are taken into account from real life information. So kind of neat. We have our own WSR, or weather surveillance radar. If you ever drive on 520, you might see this radar. That is the Patrick Space Force and Cape Canaveral Space Force radar. It is a C-band radar, unlike the S-band KMLB radar. It provides better coverage over Cape Canaveral than the National Weather Service radar does. However, National Weather Service radar is very powerful. In fact, it's more powerful than ours. So if this radar goes down, we are able to substitute it and use the Melbourne radar as necessary. But the individual band that we use with our radar allows us to discriminate clouds better than the Melbourne radar. We can tune it down to negative dBz levels to determine the edge of clouds, which are very important in determining cloud thicknesses. We've got over 40 weather towers across Cape Canaveral Space Force Station that have weather sensors like anemometers and thermometers, even some ground soil information and temperature data. Some of these towers extend as much as 400 to 500 feet in the air, especially those weather sensors that are put on the launch pads. So LC39A and LC39B have weather sensors that go all the way up to 500 feet. Most of the weather sensors that you see are at 54 feet. And one of the reasons why they are at 54 feet is because that's as tall as some of the first rockets that were ever launched from Cape Canaveral were back in the day. So it was kind of an homage to put weather sensors at 54 feet, which was the top of some of the first Redstone and Mercury rockets that were ever built and launched from Cape Canaveral. We've also got ASOS weather equipment, which is just terminal or aerodrome, airfield weather equipment. We've got field mills, which effectively measure the electrical field potential above them and compare it to what it's sensing at the surface as well. So we're able to determine enhanced electrical fields. So we can determine whether those clouds have potential to trigger lightning using a suite of 33 field mills across Cape Canaveral. We've got 915 and 48 megahertz terminal weather Doppler wind profilers. I said that wrong. TDRIP and 915 megahertz profilers that effectively use Doppler, the Doppler effect off of individual things and moisture particles in the atmosphere, sometimes bugs, birds, things like that, to determine the wind speeds in the lower and as high as 60,000 feet. The 915 megahertz profilers, we have 5 of them. 3 of them are currently working, go up to 6,000 feet. This is the 915 over here on the right. On the left, this is the 48 megahertz KSC T-drip that can measure wind speeds remotely up to 60,000 feet every 5 minutes. So we're very lucky to have these pieces of equipment. We have software on the base that allows us to display all of the weather sensors at their individual heights. So yeah, an incredible amount of weather information is available over Cape Canaveral and Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, but also sensors that fall outside of our area, because we do have sensors west of the Indian River Lagoon that allow us to see whenever there's incoming weather as well. So you'll see some of those sensors as far down as Cocoa and Cocoa Beach, and as far north as the Volusia-Brevard County line, because we have those sensors in place to be able to ensure that we know the characteristics of showers and thunderstorms if they're moving from west to east towards the launch pad. So I believe this is my last slide. I wanted to cover really, because I know we're all meteorologists here and you're interested in the various types of weather equipment that we have. But I said this earlier, I hope you guys take advantage of the fact that you have this entire suite of data that most other areas of the country would absolutely kill for. So with that said, I hope I answered any questions that were asked of me. I realize that a lot were asked. So hopefully they were. You guys have any questions for me? I'm going to end it there. And Professor Doom, I see your question, Mike. Aircraft making E-field measurements? No.
Okay, so when you have that aircraft that's out doing kind of a sortie to check out the clouds, they're not measuring E-field.
Yeah, so a cool thing that is coming is they are acquiring, I don't know, I think I could talk about this. They are acquiring a set of drones that will have field mills on board. Obviously,
Okay.
there's a lot of work, but there is a goal to get airborne electrical field measurements, which have been done before. Of course, there have been studies using aircraft, but drones provide a unique opportunity. And so if they can get a set of them, they can, potentially be lofted and do real-time measurements within clouds and things like that. So that's an Air Force thing that is hopefully coming in the next few years. So that will certainly help our ability to investigate, because obviously the surface field mills that we have are for just that. They can see the electric field at the base of a cloud, but if it's very deep, they can't really tell what's going on higher up into the cloud. It can be masked. So yeah, good question. Did I end at 8:30? Yeah, I did. Close enough. All right, Cassie, any other questions? I realized I talked for an hour with you guys.
I already warned everyone that we wouldn't be finishing until 8:30 anyway, so I was pretty spot on with my warning. I issued a warning perfectly. That probably will never happen in your life.
Good lead time. Good lead time on your warning. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, I was like 3 days ago, I said, or 4 days ago, so that's a good thing.
Right.
Any other
What's
questions?
that false alarm ratio,
That's
Kathy?
right. Otherwise, your skill score is down the drain.
Dang. Solid. Yeah, that works. I guess. I don't know. Kelly, do you have a question? You were applauding, so I just wanted to see if you had anything.
Not really. I had a bunch of questions before the presentation, but he pretty much answered every single one. So I think you answered this one kind of already, but you were talking about how when you're communicating directly with the customers, can they override some of your launch commit criteria and be like, launch anyways, I don't care, or?
Very interesting question. That's an excellent question. Kelly, I remember you. You came in with your dad, right? Not too long ago, right? Okay, yeah, it's good to see you again.
Yeah, it was a long time ago now because of COVID, but yeah.
Are you, what are you, sophomore, junior?
Yeah, sophomore.
Oh, okay. You're about to enter the hell that is Professor Doom's class and Dr. Lazarus's
She's
class.
already in Professor Doom's class. We all are.
Oh, is that so?
yeah.
That's an awesome.
Yeah,
question.
well,
No.
well,
What he's
things
talking
have
about will be
changed.
next year.
How have things changed? What happened, Mike?
I'm over in aeronautics, so they like aviation meteorology and aviation meteorology too.
Well,
Yeah, I
I'm glad,
haven't gotten to the Lazarus
I'm
experience
glad
yet.
you're teaching aviation meteorology because anyway, I won't get into that. So, so
Don't.
yeah, I won't get into that. So, excellent question, Kelly. There are lightning launch commit criteria, which are the range's responsibility, the 45th Space Wing's responsibility for us to say that it is safe to launch from our range. But then there are user criteria where a rocket company will tell us, we don't want to lift off if the winds are greater than 30 miles per hour at the surface. We don't want to lift off if the seas downrange, i.e. I'm talking about SpaceX, are greater than 10 feet. We don't want to launch if there is heavy precipitation within the flight path, but the clouds are still thin enough to not be an issue. Doesn't happen very often, but sometimes it can happen because they want to be able to photograph it as it's launching, or continue that line of sight. User criteria can be overridden by the user. Range lightning launch commit criteria cannot be overridden by the user. So much in the same way that as a 45th Weather Squadron member, I can't tell them to overrule their user criteria, like what I was telling you with the precipitation, the virga, the winds. They can't tell us to override our rules. So no, we have a mission director who typically is the colonel or the general of the 45th Space Wing. He has to give concurrence that we are go for launch. If we are red because of weather, in other words, one of those 10 lightning launch commit criteria, he's going to stay red. He's not going to waive it. But that's a good question.
Awesome answer. Yes, thank you.
Any other questions?
I have one for you, Will.
Hey, Steve.
So, where do you see this 10 years from now? Where are we heading? Are your jobs gone?
So it's an interesting question because our launch cadence continues to increase rapidly. We are seeing new customers come on board the Eastern Range, and the number of launches that we're supporting every single year continues to increase. I believe 2 years ago, we had 27 launches. Last year, we had 53 countdowns, which is a record, but we only had 38 launches. So we had 53 times where we actually entered a count on the range, but somewhere in the mid 30s for launches. This year, we're targeting 60 actual launches. So 1 per week. We always aim high, but do we ever actually get that high? No, not really. But with time, when you add Blue Origin to the mix, we're going to get there. These new rocket providers that are coming on board aren't like the old rocket providers in the sense that they don't require the same level of weather support that the old ones used to, because the rockets are more sophisticated. Like the mock-up of my Lego that you see back here, the Apollo mission that you see. This is a Lego, by the way. That's why I had it in the background. They needed a lot more weather support back in the day. Nowadays, rockets are made more safe. They have automated flight termination systems. I was telling you, or the mission flight control officer that has the big red button that if it goes off course, they have to explode. If it has to go off course, or if it happens to go off course. These new rockets have GPS built into them and other forms of being able to track them. They will self-detonate if they determine something's going wrong. So they are requiring less and less range support than ever before. So despite the fact that we're seeing more rocket launches, the support that is needed is not as much. So for the next several years, I think launch weather officers will have a place at the Cape. But if we get to the point where all rocket providers are automated flight termination system and less prone to lightning strikes, I see no reason for us to be as large as we are now. And that's scary for me to admit because, you know, job security, right? But that's just the way things are headed. The cadence is increasing, but the support that is needed for those launches is being reduced. There have been many pushes to privatize the Space Wing, where they get just all contractors up the Cape. It has been tried multiple times, but every time they realize at the end they need the federal government and specifically the military to be able to run things. We are at 22, 23 trillion dollars in debt right now, right?
Yeah.
You better damn well believe that they're going to suddenly feel differently about that a couple of years from now. Let's print the money during COVID, but I don't mean to get political or anything like that, but print the money during COVID, but then all of a sudden, yep, we don't need all these programs anymore. So that day is coming. I still think it's several years down the line, but I have no doubt that with time, as rockets get more protected from there will be a reduction. I think there will always be a need for weather support, though, at the end of the day. I think there will always, but you guys, if you guys are interested in this field, I know that might scare you guys a little bit. What's going to happen is 10, 20 years from now, I think you'll end up working for SpaceX as a meteorology. You'll end up working for Blue Origin as a meteorologist, and you might be up here at the Cape. But the presence as we know it now with the Space Force and the Air Force may be different. It's very possible.
I've got one last question.
Go for it.
When it comes to lightning, are you guys gearing towards more microphysical measurements? Ice nuclei type, cloud condensation nuclei numbers and all those kind of measurements to help refine what you're doing? Or is that like, wow, that's just way too expensive?
It's a cost factor. You're right. Obviously, would it assist? We are driven by what the Lightning Advisory Panel tells us is going to provide us the biggest payoff or the biggest bang for our buck. And at that point, so much push has been towards electrical field measurements and getting those rules, less stringent. They've been trying to do that from a thickness perspective and from an electrical field perspective, less so than a microphysical aspect. And have they talked about it? Sure, but I just don't think that's something that is in their playbook right now. No.
Okay.
Is it worth pursuing? Of course, but they also know what we just talked about, which is rockets eventually are going to be saved from lightning. So where are we going to get our best bang for our buck? And I don't know the answer to that. I just don't know. Jeff Bezos lightning safe by next year. So if he can do it, they will have no use for the 45th Weather Squadron, except I think, day-to-day operations, day-to-day. When they're bringing the rocket out, of course, it's going to be susceptible. The people that are out there are susceptible to lightning. They want to take on that responsibility. They'll probably still turn to us. But, during the countdown, I can tell you that SpaceX's countdown has 1/5 of the range support that is needed compared to a United launch, Delta or Atlas rocket launch, simply because of all the technology and equipment that's needed for those launches versus a SpaceX. We think Blue Origin is going to be even less.
Okay.
Any other questions, guys?
Well, thank you.
Yeah, it was great.
Thanks, guys. I hope you really enjoyed it. It was a pleasure to talk to you guys again. And Mike and Steve, it's great to see you as usual. And hopefully we can see one another in person.
That would be awesome.
Next year. Not next year, but next fiscal year, next school year, maybe.
I think the last time was Peggy's retirement.
Yeah, we were at Peggy.
Yeah, it was good to see you guys there. Yes, she got out at the right time.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, she's got uncanny
timing.
Yeah, she does. Absolutely. So, all right, guys. Cassie?
You got no comments about Lindsay?
No, she never even activated her camera. I can't even make fun of her. Like,
why?
Oh, wow.
I've been waiting.
The reason why I don't do this is because the background's just awful. So
she looks like an Oompa Loompa.
I like it.
I like it.
It's very
rustic. I just don't understand. I like it.
It's nice during the day.
It's like,
but at night I just look very orange, spray tanned orange.
Well, that's true. You are, you look very radiating.
Orange is out in 2021.
Ooh,
Love
we
it.
won't go there, will we?
Love it. Well, good to see everyone, and it was
Thank
a
you so
pleasure.
much for coming. Appreciate we
Yes.
appreciate
Yeah,
it.
thanks for
Thank you
inviting
very
us
much.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thanks for putting this together, Cassie.
No
Bye.
problem.
too. Good job,
Bye.
good job, guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye.